Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Life from the Inside Out with Kris. Before we begin with Kris's unparalleled metaphysical content, I know that many of you watching have felt a sense of being ungrounded, unhinged, or out of balance in these times. I know. I've felt this way too. Kris's teachings have similarities to popular ideas such as the law of attraction and the secret. The difference is that Kris's knowledge goes even deeper into reality creation and helps resolve many of the problems identified with the law of attraction. The information he shares helps restore grounding and that sense of balance that many of us have lost in these times. If you're ready for the law of attraction and secret 2.0 and want to be a part of this fantastic community, then hit that like button, subscribe, drop a comment below, and press the bell icon so that you get notified when Kris releases cool, new metaphysical content. Kris also offers life-changing online seminars, private sessions, and mentoring sessions, which are all linked in the description below. Glad you're here with us, and let's jump into it.
And welcome to a slightly different episode of Life from the Inside Out. Today I thought I would try this way at the request of my friend Alan, who has often mentioned or made reference to the inner child, and recently asked if I could do a standalone video with Kris. At first I said I'm just getting used to doing it with Daniel and our group. Then the other day, while walking my dog, I thought, how could I do that? So I eventually realized that I could do it with Zoom. And since Alan had made mention of the inner child, the imaginary friend more specifically, I thought it would be a good opportunity to allow Kris to present some stuff on that. And so here we are. And in a moment, I'll let Kris come through and speak on children's imaginary friends. And we'll see how that works out. At first, I wasn't too sure because I've always had someone engage Kris. And then I thought, with a subject in mind, it could also be done. So here we go. Now we trust that you are comfortable, and we thank you for your consideration in watching and listening to this, as Joseph referred to, a slightly different version of Life from the Inside Out. And as he suggested, the topic of children's imaginary friends is actually more fascinating than you could, quote unquote, imagine. And by that we mean that naturally, children are born with a very vivid imagination, whether they display it or not. And the use of their imagination, if encouraged, can be extremely beneficial for the child. What is also interesting is that many children have what is recognized as an imaginary friend. Now, there are many studies, psychological, psychiatric, on this subject matter. We have our own little slant, if you like, our own observations. And this comes from having had many human lives growing up as a child, male and female, many times over, and joining your world in a fascinating way. Now, imaginary friends are often considered suspect especially if you watch too many Hollywood movies, where something nefarious is implied in the imaginary friend. But for the most part, some parents, as a result of that, sometimes consider that having an imaginary friend for their child should be curbed as early as possible, lest that child, their child, develop some kind of psychological, emotional, or mental health issues. And we are here to suggest that, on the contrary, having an imaginary friend for a child can be very, very beneficial. First of all, it enables that child to find ways to start dealing with and coping with the world of physical experience. And children use their imaginations in wonderful ways. For instance, they may use their imagination on trying to figure out how to go from crawling on all fours to walking to running, and then, of course, into getting in all the kitchen cupboards and having a party. Those of you who have raised children may remember those episodes. Having an imaginary friend for a child is not only about learning to cope with the world of physical experience, but it also enables the child to start understanding the ins and outs of relationships with human beings, but from the point of view of having a relationship with their imaginary friend. There is more. Surprisingly, the imaginary friend can be considered to be in a few different categories, such as a probable or alternate self, which may fall in the realm of reincarnation, having had previous lives, or perhaps even delving into the subject matter of future lives and the future self, what they may aspire to be as they develop and grow old or older. Again, learning to navigate the ins and outs of their physical experience, the other people in there, their parents, siblings, relationships, their friends, entering the school system, and the idea of encouraging your child's imagination can be extremely beneficial in the development of your child's mental, emotional, and psychological health, because they respond and exchange with their imaginary friends, trying to understand some of the issues that they come upon with the world of physical experience. It helps build a database, a repertoire of knowledge and wisdom. And our reference to that imaginary friend being an representation of a future aspect of their own lives greatly merits investigation. Some additional research into that particular capacity of the imaginary friend. Now, usually, as the child reaches 8 or 9 years old, that imaginary friend or their imaginary friend is often neglected, left behind, so that they can start dealing with the world of physical experience. Though there are always exceptions to that. And as far as just plain old imagination, there is really no way or reason why your child's imagination should be curtailed or even put down, because the child needs their imagination. You may not necessarily recognize it, but everything in your world is the result of ideas that have gone through the mill of your imagination in order to create it as physical experience. Even your greatest civilizations, even what you consider now your present civilization, everything within it and all of its functions and capacities and potentials are the results of imagination and how you utilized not only your feelings and emotions, but your intellect, your rational and logical mind, to take those ideas and imaginations into the potentials that transform your lives and your present and or even past, as well as future civilizations. Returning to the topic of the imaginary friend for a moment, it is also highly relevant that the child may depend on that imaginary friend as a way to feel safe in a world they hardly understand at this point, a world populated with adults and other children, a world that expects certain things of them, some of which might necessarily be incomprehensible to the child. But through the relationship they have with their imaginary friend, they learn to grow and adapt to that world, even to determining for themselves what that future may be for them, even if it is incremental, small steps, up to the point where they can make big leaps of their imagination and grow towards their teenage years and their young adulthood and their full-blown adult lives. So the process of imagination, and specifically the imaginary friend, is quite an ingenious phenomenon of your species. You may sometimes wonder what the heck is going on in your child's imagination. You may even think your child has an overactive imagination. But the idea is not to begin the process of whittling away at the child's imagination, because the child has invested feelings, emotions, and understandings in that psychological construct, and may indeed have a certain reliance on that relationship to help them navigate the sometimes choppy waters of growing up. Again, wondering and accepting what is expected of them at multiple levels. So this process of an imaginary friend is most useful, especially in the areas we have just described. And the idea is not to shame or minimize the importance of the imaginary friend to your child, but to encourage an understanding of that relationship, not to belittle the child, and not to try and tell the child that it is time that they grow up, become real, man up, and deal with the world, because that imaginary friend actually provides a deep psychological safety blanket so that they can begin to understand the world they will then have as an adult. So it is a very, very important personal evolutionary coping mechanism. And as we suggested, it is important to not to minimize or shame or trivialize or demand that the child give up this process, but instead encourage the child. For instance, if they are having some struggles or difficulties, encourage the child to inquire from their imaginary friend or friends how they can help understand and solve certain of their personal challenges. Because a child has challenges and they should never be trivialized. And you may recall on your own how your own childhood challenges might have been trivialized. And it is not something you can hand down to your own children, because you know full well how it affected you. And it may have minimalized, trivialized, and discounted you, because you are part of your imaginary friend. Your child is part of his imaginary friend or her imaginary friend, just as their imaginary friend is a part of the child. So it literally behooves and challenges your own intelligence, your own emotions, your own feelings, and your own fears and insecurities in that way, so that you also may blossom, just as your child has a sense of his or her potential, and they want to blossom into as much of their potential as is possible. So the idea of nipping their own potential in the bud is counterproductive on all levels. So we greatly encourage that you help nurture, cultivate your child's understanding of their imaginary friend and how to tap that potential so that they too can bloom in as many ways as possible, not just the way society expects of them, not just the way you might expect of your child, but in the way that the child senses with all of their being to blossom, grow, and nurture themselves into the being that they sense. And that requires a strong rooting into imagination. We consider feelings, emotions, and imagination as powerful technologies, as powerful mechanisms of consciousness that can be utilized to enrich all of your lives. So it might be an incredibly nurturing approach to cultivate and nurture your child's feelings, emotions, and imagination in the best, richest way possible. It is not just your child who will benefit, but you will also benefit greatly. So it gives you and your child more leeway and a better understanding of relationships, not just between parent-child, humans and humans, but also the child and their own inner or higher or greater or wider self, whatever label you want to put on it. It is potential. And that potential easily can be trampled upon with just a few words, however well-intentioned they may be. There are also other words that can be utilized to bring your child to a completely different, if you want, level of understanding and growth. So we strongly suggest that investigating this potential for yourself and your child is well worth the time that you invest in that capacity. And we thank you for your consideration. And if you like this, please feel free to hit that subscribe button in any way you can. And if you have other inquiries, other questions, leave them in the comments. We might be able to continue this little sidebar venture with Joseph in this very particular way by responding to your comments and inquiries. And with that, we return Joseph to you, and we thank you.
Thanks for watching, and if you would like to leave a question for Kris, drop it in the comments below. Myself, Serge, or someone from the Kris team will be checking and may use them to drive the discussion, put them in future episodes. So if you'd like to interact with the Kris community, feel free. Put your questions below, and we'd love to hear from you, and see you again next time.